Hey everybody, welcome to the Mana Leak. I'm John as always, and we've got another set review today. We've got Red. As always, the disclaimers are back in the first set review of the week, back in the white set review, so if you want to make sure what the kind of gist of this set review is, you should go and watch that if you haven't already. Plus, you wouldn't want to miss out on a whole color of cards, so go check that out. But we're going to jump right on into the first card. We've got Akoum Firebird. Akoum Firebird is a 2 red creature phoenix at Mythic, starting with a big one. It's a 3/3, it's got flying, it's got haste. It must attack each turn if able, and it has landfall. Whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control, you may pay 4 red. If you do, return Akoum Firebird from your graveyard to the battlefield. Very interesting. 4 mana, 3/3 flying haste is pretty solid. It has to attack every turn, so there's going to be some unfortunate scenarios where it's a dead card in your hand if your opponent has a decent flyer or a soon-to-be dead card on the battlefield. But I don't expect that to be too terribly often. Generally, your 3/3 flyer you're going to be attacking with every turn anyways. The return ability is definitely expensive. You know, landfall plus, you need to drop 4 red right then and there. You're going to be spending your turn most likely to bring this back. But I think there's a lot of matchups where it's going to be really just kind of backbreaking for your opponent unless they've got an even better flyer. You know, if they have a 5/5 flyer, returning this is dumb. You're going to return it, it's going to fly into it and die yet again. But if your opponent has to, you know, spend removal on this and the next turn it just comes back, it's going to really be backbreaking. It seems like a fairly solid first pick to me. I don't quite want to put it into bomb territory. That return cost is pricey. Don't get me wrong. It is definitely pricey. But I think it is definitely kind of A- territory. It's not an A, it's not an A+, but I don't want to go much lower than A-. So A- for me. Next up, we have Akoum Hellkite. Akoum Hellkite is a 4 red creature dragon at rare. It's a 4/4. It's got flying. It's got landfall. And this is the type of land matters cycle card. Whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control, Akoum Hellkite deals 1 damage to target creature or player. If that land is a mountain, Akoum Hellkite deals 2 damage to that creature or player instead. 4/4 flyer for 6 is slightly expensive, but not too bad. We pay 3 color for a 3/3 flyer with an upside, so 4 color isn't too bad. This is late in the game, so just like the Angel that we talked about, I'm not sure how many more times you're going to trigger this before the game is just over. In a lot of situations, if you have a 4/4 flyer, they're just dead in a couple of turns. 2, 3, 4 turns max, probably by the time you're attacking on turn 7, they're dead to this flyer. So the trigger's not that awesome. The shock off the mountain is pretty nice. If you are hitting your swamp or your forest or your plains or your island off this and doing 1 damage to something, big whoop, you're probably just going to ping your opponent just to get in a little bit more damage. The shock is nice. That could actually have some effect. And you may want to make sure that you hold your land back until the second main phase, so maybe you can get through some extra damage on a blocker or something and kill something post-combat. But, it seems fine. It seems fine. The 4/4 flyer aspect of it is what kind of pushes this a little bit higher for me. But yeah, these expensive landfall cards, I'm not 100% sold on them, but this one feels the best to me. Just a little bit better than the Angel. The Angel, of course, costing 7 was a big problem for me. But I'm pretty happy with this one. I'm pretty happy to give it a B+. I think it's going to be relatively solid. Just make sure you are building for the late game. Don't put this in your ally deck that, goes 1 drops, 2 drops, 3 drops, 4 drops, space this guy, because it's not going to happen. So make sure you do put it in the right deck, but B+ for me. All right, next up we have a Combstone Waker. This is a 1 and a red creature human shaman at uncommon. It's a 2/1. It's got landfall, and it says whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control, you may pay 2 and a red. If you do, put a 3/1 red elemental creature token with trample and haste onto the battlefield. Exile that token at the beginning of the next end step. So this is actually really similar to Satyr Nixsmith, which was pretty decent in Born of the Gods. Satyr Nixsmith, when you untapped it, it had Inspire, so when you untapped it, you could pay 2 and a red to get a 3/1 haste elemental. It didn't have trample. So it required you to have tapped it, which probably meant you attacked with it, and it was a 2/1 for 3, actually. Plus, its 3/1 didn't have trample. So the base creature is better here, and the creature it makes is better here, so I think this is actually a relatively solid card. It's meant for a pretty aggressive, fast deck, of course. You know, you want to be playing this on turn 2, playing your land on turn 3, and making the 3/1 elemental. It'll almost always be right to make that, I think. And then just keep doing that until your opponent is reliably blocking your 3/1s, and then you start playing all the stuff that you've got sitting in your hand. I'm pretty excited about this card. I think it's going to be very solid, and boy, do I hope that people undervalue it, and I just get to play with it regularly. Now, of course, you don't want multiples. Having 2 of these is just bad, because if you play one on turn 2 and one on turn 3, then you're going to have 6 mana to activate them. They're going to do nothing. So make sure you don't load up on these, but the first one I think is super playable. I'm going to go with a B- on it. Next up, we have Barrage Titan. Barrage Titan is a 4 and a red creature Eldrazi at rare. It's a 5/3, it's got Devoid, and you can pay 2 and a red and sacrifice another colorless creature. Barrage Titan deals damage equal to the sacrificed creature's power to target creature or player. So it takes a colorless creature and basically hucks it at a creature or a player. Pretty interesting. 5/3 is big power and weak toughness for 4 mana, so that's a little bit iffy. The other Eldrazi that care about colorless creatures you can usually get by just using the Scions for them, so you know, a lot of things will require a colorless creature or they'll buff a colorless creature and it'll work really well with the Scions. This doesn't. You know, sacking a Scion to deal 1 damage doesn't seem all that good to me. So it's a little bit mediocre there, but if you can build around this, and of course if you just have a large number of colorless creatures, as soon as they become useless to you, as soon as you can't attack through with them, you can just throw them at your opponent and deal damage, which I think is pretty darn fine. I'm not sold on this being first pickable, like pack 1, pick 1, but I think I'd probably take this highly enough if I was in red and I got past this, or I opened this pack 2 or pack 3. And I definitely would make sure that I'm building around the colorless plan. You don't put this in your ally deck or things like that. So I'm going to go with B- on it, I think, is where I want to fall. I'm happy with it. I'm excited to play with it. It has its place, and it has places where it doesn't go. Next up, we've got Belligerent Whiptail. This is a 3 and a red creature worm at common. It's a 4/2. It's got landfall. Whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control, Belligerent Whiptail gains first strike until end of turn. So this seems like filler. 4/2 is pretty darn weak stats. You know, Cobble Brute was a 5/2 for 3 and a red, but it didn't get first strike now and then. Sometimes having first strike makes this a bit better. It makes it into a really nice attacker. Now, of course, you're not all that commonly going to have first strike on your opponent's turn. You know, outside of Evolving Wilds or things like that, you're not going to be getting landfall on their turn, so this is kind of weak in any sort of defensive situation. But yeah, I think if you need a 4-drop creature, here you go. If you're being super aggressive, this might help you out if you hit your land drops. If you don't, it's going to be a Cobble Brute where it gets in once and probably dies. Yeah, seems like filler to me, so just a straight up C. Next up, we've got Boiling Earth. Boiling Earth is a 1 and a red sorcery at common, and it says Boiling Earth deals 1 damage to each creature your opponents control. Awaken 4 for 6 and a red. Seems like sideboard material to me, unless you're going up against like a crazy amount of Scions. You probably don't want to play this. The base spell's just pretty weak. We've seen things like this before, Electrickery and whatnot, where you deal 1 damage to your opponent's board, and outside of rare situations, you just don't really get all that much for playing it. The Awaken effect is just ridiculously expensive for what it is. 7 mana for a 4/4 that pings my opponent's team. Not really in any way, shape, or form excited about that. I just don't see playing this card in the main deck ever, and even in the sideboard, I'm not totally sure there's many cases where I want to pull it out, so I'm going to go with a D- on it. Next up, we have Chasm Guide. Chasm Guide is a 3 and a red creature Goblin Scout ally at uncommon. It's a 3/2, and it's got Rally. Whenever Chasm Guide or another ally enters the battlefield under your control, creatures you control gain haste until end of turn. Yeah. This is kind of weak, because this really reads, this card has haste, and allies you control have haste. Because, of course, giving your team haste is meaningless outside of the creature that just entered the battlefield. That's the one that is going to use haste. The rest are not. Unlike most team-wide rally abilities, this one doesn't really matter that it's team-wide. It's a nice effect. It'll help out an aggressive deck. But turn 4 is getting slightly late for this effect to have the most impact that it could. But it will have some impact. At 4 mana for a 3/2, I'm not unhappy to play this anyways. And the upside's good enough that if you build around it, it'll be playable probably just all the time. Yeah, C+ for me. It seems just fine. Just fine. Next up, we have Crumble to Dust. This is 3 and a red for a sorcery at uncommon. It has Devoid, so it is colorless. And it says exile target non-basic land. Search its controller's graveyard, hand, and library for any number of cards with the same name as that land, and exile them. Then that player shuffles his or her library. This is constructed. You're not going to be facing a deck, probably ever, that is going to have non-basic lands and multiples of them. You're going to have maybe a non-basic land, but there's not going to be another one. This is F-. This is bottom of the barrel. Never, ever, 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 ever take this. Never, ever, 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 ever play this. I don't think any of the manned lands are scary enough that I would want to, make sure that I dig them out of my opponent's library or make sure that I have a way to kill them. This is just garbage. Don't ever play this, please. F-. Next up, we have Dragon Master Outcast. Dragon Master Outcast is a single red mana for a creature human shaman at Mythic. It's a 1/1. It's a 1/1 for 1. At the beginning of your upkeep, if you control 6 or more lands, put a 5/5 red dragon creature token with flying onto the battlefield. Seems pretty solid to me. The mana cost might say that it costs 1 mana, but you should probably never play this as anything but a 5 or 6 drop. Playing this too long before you have 6 lands is just begging for this to eat some sort of removal and for you to have a whole lot of bad feelings. It's about as weak as it possibly could be, but its effect is really, really, really good. Getting a 5/5 dragon every single turn is going to end the game pretty darn quickly. And hopefully if you do keep this until turn 5 or 6 or 7, your opponent's going to have wasted some of their premium removal on other things, and they're not going to be able to as easily kill this. The fact that it is so weak is going to knock it down ever so slightly for me, but not enough for me to give this anything other than A-. I really like this card. I'll first pick it every time I see it, and I'll play it every time I have it. Next up, we have Fire Mantle Mage. This is a 2 and a red creature human shaman ally at uncommon for a 2/2. It's got Rally, and it says whenever Fire Mantle Mage or another ally enters the battlefield under your control, creatures you control gain Menace until end of turn. Menace, of course, being the new name for the ability where a creature cannot be blocked except by 2 or more. This seems really good to me. It's cheap enough to come down early. So this is going to be, one of your first allies you play. And then every ally after that is going to give your whole team Menace. And that's what I like. I like these rally abilities that are going to be on the battlefield early in the game and activating from there. The super powerful ones, of course, being 5 drops. You're not going to activate them as many times as I'd like. This could close out the game pretty darn fast in an aggressive red-white ally deck. If you're flooding the board and just getting in with creatures that have to be double blocked, you're going to get a lot of damage through. I think I like this, like a few of the other team-wide white allies. I think this is going to be a relatively key component in a really dominating ally deck. I give this a solid B. I think this is a really, really solid card. Next up, we've got Goblin Warpaint. This is a classic core set reprint, possibly actually from Zendikar originally, I think. But anyways, it is a 1 and a red enchantment aura at common. It says enchant creature. Enchanted creature gets +2/+2 and has haste. It's never really been good. The haste, of course, only matters if you're putting down a creature and then immediately putting this on it, which means you're not even using all of your mana for a big creature. You're putting this on a smaller one. So really, this is kind of +2/+2 for the cost of having this card in your deck, +1 and a red. It's not great. It's not good. It's kind of bad. It's one of the more ineffectual auras that are out there. It's never really been playable in the sets that it's been printed in. I don't want to touch this, and I would strongly recommend you don't touch it either. I'm going to go with a D- on this. It's got some minuscule value, but not much. Next up, we have Cozel X Sentinel. This is a 1 and a red creature Eldrazi Drone at common. It's a 1/4, it has Devoid, and whenever you cast a colorless spell, Cozel X Sentinel gets +1/+0 until end of turn. 1/4 for 2 is never really what red wants to be doing, ever. Red is aggressive. Even in the most controlling or mid-rangey of red decks, red is still pretty aggressive, and 1/4 is not aggressive. This would only be worse if it was an 0/4 or something. Making this sometimes a 2/4 still is not what red is ever going to want to be doing. Rarely is this ever going to be a 3/4 or anything bigger than that. Big pass for me. It's got some minor sideboard applications. If you discover that you're not actually the beatdown in your matchup, then yeah, this could come in, but that's about the only place, and I would never main deck it, so straight up D for me. Next up, we have Lava Step Raider. Single red for a creature goblin warrior at common. It's a 1/2. For 2 and a red, Lava Step Raider gets +2/+0 until end of turn. Yeah, this is double fire breathing and pretty darn expensive for it. No, thank you. You don't play Bellows Lizard. You don't play this. Straight up F. Don't ever play this. The upside is barely there. You don't want to be wasting 3 mana to make this into a 3/2. You want to be playing stuff. You want to be playing other creatures. Because, of course, as soon as your turn's over, this is back to being a 1/2, and probably one of the more miserable blockers you could possibly have. So, straight up F. Avoid this every time. Next up, we've got McIntee Slide Runner. 1 and a red for a creature beast at common. It's a 2/1. It's got trample. And it has landfall. Whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control, McIntee Slide Runner gets +1/+1 until end of turn. So a 2/1 with trample for 2 is fine. The trample's nearly pointless, though, in almost all cases. Sometimes this will be a 3/2 trample. A fair number of times, actually, because, of course, this is a 2-drop. You play it on turn 2. This will be a 3/2, several times. This will probably be a 3/2 up until it dies. Late game, it may not be as good, but it's going to be a 3/2 with trample. It's still going to die in nearly all combat scenarios, but you might get some extra damage through, and you might actually be able to get, slightly trade up with a 3/3 or a 4/3 or something like that. Ultimately, it's just completely filler material, and there's probably better things to be playing a lot of the time, but it's totally fine. So, middle of the road, C. Next up, we have Molten Nursery. This is a 2 and a red enchantment at uncommon. It's got Devoid, and whenever you cast a colorless spell, Molten Nursery deals 1 damage to target creature or player. Impact Tremors was something-ish in Dragons of Tarkir, or was that Fate? Whatever set it was in. It sort of was a thing, but it was a common, so you could reliably pick up a bunch of them, and it triggered way more readily than this ever will. You're going to have to really build around this in order to be triggering this all that often. And playing probably some suboptimal cards just to deal 1 damage to a creature or a player just isn't really going to get this done. And of course, with this being uncommon, you're not going to have multiples of these. You're not going to have 2 or 3 or 4 of these. You're going to be lucky to have your first one because, of course, uncommons are not necessarily in every draft pod, especially in multiples. I think it's too risky to really try to go in on this. Hitting target creature or player is pretty nice, but I just don't see this doing enough to be super playable. I don't see this doing enough to waste a turn to play this as a do-nothing enchantment. So I've got to go with like a D- on this. I'd love to see somebody try to build around it, but I don't see it happening. Next up, we have Nettle Drone. Nettle Drone is a 2 and a red creature Eldrazi Drone at common. For a 3/1, it's got Devoid. You can tap it. Nettle Drone deals 1 damage to each opponent. And whenever you cast a colorless spell, on-tap Nettle Drone. This I like. 3/1 for 3 is fine. We've played that as recently as Deadbridge Shaman, which is a 3/1 for 3 with an upside. It's fine, why not? A 3/1 that pings and can even double ping or rarely triple ping if you do have a large number of colorless spells, devoid or otherwise, is pretty good. I like this guy. I hope to see a ton of value come out of him. High pick for me until I learn otherwise, and I would love to have multiples of these. Have 2 of these, ping twice, play a colorless spell, ping 2 more times. Just seems fun to me. I like pingers. I like pingers quite a bit. I've got to go with B- on this. I really like Nettle Drone. Next up, we have Undue Champion. Undue Champion is a 2 red creature, Minotaur Warrior ally at common. It's a 4/3. It's got Rally. Whenever Undue Champion or another ally enters the battlefield under your control, creatures you control gain trample until end of turn. Allies aren't generally all that big. They are 2/2s and 3/3s and 4/3s. Trample's not going to do all that much. This is, I think, one of the weaker rally cards. The ability just isn't all that great. It's kind of like the haste one, where it's fine and you'll get some value here or there out of it, but I think it's even worse than the haste one. I don't like this one. I don't think I'd actually really go out of my way to play this one unless I was really hurting for creatures or for ally enablers. I'm not really going out of my way to play this for the rally ability itself. I'm going to go with C- on this. I think it could be exchanged for really anything else. Next up, we have Outnumber. This is a single red instant at common. Outnumber deals damage to target creature equal to the number of creatures you control. This makes me nervous because there will be some non-zero amount of the time where you're going to want to cast this and you're going to have no creatures, and it says, pay a red, do nothing. And when you really want removal, which is when you're behind, of course, this is generally going to be bad. If you're behind and you draw a lightning bolt, cool, you get to bolt something. If you're behind and you've got a tiny number of creatures on the board, or even 0, and you draw this, well, that is just terrible. This is garbage. It does break board stalls a little bit, and on average, it will probably be, a shock. Maybe even a lightning bolt. It works really nicely with Scion producers, of course, because if you're producing a few of them, you're going to really be ramping up not only your mana, but you're going to be ramping up your number of creatures, making this into 4, 5, 6 damage for 1 single red. So inconsistency is kind of the name of the game here. It's going to be tough to really know, without playing the format, exactly how commonly this is going to be a good burn spell and how commonly it's going to be a bad burn spell or just a do-nothing card. I think I'm going to probably start out not taking this as highly as I should. I see the power, but I also see the inconsistency. I'm going to start at C+ on this, fully prepared to be wrong about it. Fully prepared. But C+ to start. Next up, we have Processor Assault. This is a 1 and a red sorcery at uncommon. It has Devoid. As an additional cost to cast Processor Assault, put a card an opponent owns from exile into that player's graveyard. Processor Assault deals 5 damage to target creature. So, if I thought Outnumber was inconsistent and going to be dead some amount of the time, what on earth do I think about this? Yeesh. 5 damage, instant speed for 2... Or, sorry, it's not instant speed at all. Let's rephrase that. 5 damage at sorcery speed for 1 and a red is fine. It's decent even, but you're really going to need to be careful about what deck you put this in. Outnumber is going to be a dead card some amount of the time. This is going to be a dead card a much larger amount of the time. You need to be a very carefully crafted ingest processor deck. You're going to need to have some critical number of ingesters and or other exile effects, or else this card is horrible. This card I'm going to be very careful about. I do not want to take this very highly unless I'm in that deck already. It would suck taking this highly and then just not getting enough exile effects and it being completely unplayable. So I'm going to start out kind of low on this as well. I see the power in the deck that it wants to be in, and then everywhere else it just looks bad. So I've got to go with I think a middle of the road C on this. I kind of even want to be a little bit lower to C-. Next up, we have Radiant Flames. This is 2 and a red for a sorcery at rare. It says, Converge. Radiant Flames deals X damage to each creature, where X is the number of colors of mana spent to cast Radiant Flames. So, of course, this is going to be 2 most of the time. It's going to be Pyroclasm for 1 more mana. Sometimes it'll be Anger of the Gods. I don't super know about this. I've never actually played with Pyroclasm in Limited. I've only played with it in Constructed, where you play super appropriately with it. So I just don't know if this really fits in, especially in a red deck where, you know, most of the time your plan is to be dropping small things, being aggressive, and getting in for a bunch of damage. So Radiant Flames is just going to wipe your board. So you're going to need to hold back, which is not what red wants to do, which means you're probably going to be, you know, more black or white or blue or green with a lower red. I don't know about this card. Ultimately, it feels kind of strange for this to be rare. You know, it is just a slightly more expensive Pyroclasm most of the time, and at best, it's Anger of the Gods, which I guess was rare, but yeah, I don't know. It feels like a pretty weak rare to me, and it doesn't feel like a high pick at all. It could be good against a bunch of Scions, of course, if you do cast this for red. Maybe I'm missing something here, but I just don't see it being all that good. Good enough to be a C+, but no higher than that, and totally, utterly not first pickable for me. Next up, we've got Reckless Cohort. This is a 1 and a red creature, human, warrior, ally at common. It's a 2/2, and Reckless Cohort attacks each combat if able, unless you control another ally. It seems fine, although ultimately I think it's pretty replaceable. Mage Ring Bully had Prowess, which made it slightly better. But in an ally deck, this should be turned off by the time you want to stop attacking with it anyways. You know, turn 2, you play it as your first creature. Turn 3, you attack with it because you have to. At that point, you may have an ally, and you may have to, or you may be able to just stop attacking with this. So I don't think it's bad. I won't feel too terrible playing this, but I also won't really be looking to play it. It's going to be my 23rd, oops, I need another creature kind of card. So C-. Next up, we have Retreat to Valakut. Retreat to Valakut is a 2 and a red enchantment at uncommon. It has landfall, and it says whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control, choose 1. Target creature gets +2/+0 until end of turn, or target creature can't block this turn. I kind of think this is a bit of a miss. I don't really like this retreat at all, and the reason is that it's hyper aggressive. The first ability +2/+0 to target creature, super aggressive. The second ability, target creature can't block, super aggressive. Spending turn 3 to play an enchantment that does nothing, and that you have to continue to play lands in order for it to do something, super not aggressive. Not what an aggressive deck wants to be doing in any way, shape, or form. So I think this really just kind of misses. I think this is just so contrary to what you want to be doing that I don't think it's ultimately all that playable. I feel like this is the worst of the retreats, the least playable by at least a little bit. I'm going to advise you stay away from this. I've very interestingly seen people on this card be all over the place. I've seen people give this B+, I've seen people give this D-. So this one I'm curious about. I want to see how it works, but I really dislike how much it fights against itself for what it wants to do and where it wants to be. So I'm going to be pretty darn low on this. I'm going to go with the D+ crowd. Ultimately I'm going to go with the D+ crowd. I don't see it. I see it fighting against itself way too much. If this was free, I love the rules text. I hate the fact that it's a card that I have to pay for and spend a turn on. So, D+. Next up, we've got a big, beefy reprint from way back in time, way back to Tempest. Rolling Thunder. Rolling Thunder is an X red sorcery at uncommon. Rolling Thunder deals X damage divided as you choose among any number of target creatures and or players. This card was ridiculous in Tempest. It was also a common, which that was a further part of it being a bit ridiculous. Now, nearly 20 years ago, creatures were on average much smaller. A 3/3 was huge. A 4/4 was just a crazy bomb. These days, creatures are bigger. Creatures are bigger on average by far. So I expect this to be less brokenly awesome as it was in Tempest. In Tempest, you could pretty reliably just, wipe an opponent's board with this thing and probably still ping them for a damage or two. These days, I expect Rolling Thunder to be more of a single creature kill spell that maybe gets some extra damage through to the opponent as well. You'll get lucky sometimes, maybe get 2 creatures, maybe get 3, maybe get to really screw up their ramp plans and, wipe out a ton of Eldrazi Scions. That'll be cool. I still think this card is awesome. I still think it's going to be a super high pick, first pickable with a weak rare in the pack. I've got to go with A- on it. I just don't think it's going to be as insane as it was 20 years ago. But I think it's still going to be pretty damn good. So A- for me. Next up, we have Serpentine Strike. Serpentine Strike is a 5 red sorcery at rare. It has Devoid, and it says Serpentine Spike deals 2 damage to target creature, 3 damage to another target creature, and 4 damage to a third target creature. If a creature dealt damage this way would die this turn, exile it instead. Very important, it does say another, and then it says a third target. You cannot target the same creature twice with this card. So keep that in mind. 7 is a lot. Holy crow, 7 is a lot. At that point in the game, it isn't even super likely to kill what you want. Turn 7, I'm not usually looking to kill off their 2/2 or their 3/3. Maybe their 4/4 has been causing me some problems. And you turn on processors with it, because if you do kill things, you get to exile it, but turning on your processors at turn 7 seems pretty darn late to me, especially because most of the good processors are single use. They enter the battlefield, they process, and they're done. There's some repeatable ones, and they were decent, but a lot of them, it's a one-shot deal. So I don't know, I think I'm out on this. I think it's just way too pricey to be killing an X2, an X3, and an X4. And that's if you're lucky, if they do have an X2, an X3, and an X4. It could even be worse where, you only kill one thing with this and you damage some others. I don't want to take this first pick. I don't want to take this 5th pick. I don't want to take this if I'm in red and I open it pack 3. I don't think this is a good card at all. I'm going to go with a C- on it. Absolutely, if you need some burn, if you need some removal, if you think you can hit the mana, you could go with this. But I'm thinking C-. I may even want to drop this down to a D. It's just so pricey for what it does. Next up, we have Shatter Skull Recruit. This is a 3 red creature, giant warrior ally at common. It's a 4/4 and it has Menace. So a 4/4 Menace for 5 seems totally fine. It's not special, it's not exciting. You're not going to have to go out of your way to get these, but as a curve topper in an aggressive deck, especially allies, because it is an ally, this just seems solid. Totally, utterly solid. 4/4 Menace is going to be killing a lot of things. It's going to be getting through for serious damage if it's not killing things. I'm pretty happy to play the first of these. I don't think I'd play a second. 3 red is a tricky casting cost, but I think the first one's totally fine. C+ for me. I'm not super looking to replace the first one of these. Next up, we have Stone Fury. Stone Fury is a 3 red instant at common. Stone Fury deals damage to target creature equal to the number of lands you control. So here's some instant burn. So it deals 5 damage to a creature at a minimum. You're going to have 5 lands to cast this, unless you were using Scions, which I probably wouldn't recommend. So that's fine. It's instant speed, so that's good. It's kind of expensive for burn, but it is dealing a lot of damage. It doesn't hit players. That kind of sucks. I think it's fine enough. I think you're going to be generally relatively happy with this. It's not burn for aggressive decks, but it is burn for mid-rangey decks, and even slightly less aggressive decks should be fine with this in the 5-drop slot. Yeah, it's ultimately fine enough. I'm really wondering where my cheap 2 and 3 damage burn is. Where's my Lightning Strike? Where's my, even my Bolt of Keranos? Where's that? I have not seen those just yet. But this is what we have, so, you're going to be relatively happy with this most of the time, I think, but I wish it hit players, and I wish it wasn't 5 mana, but so be it. So I can see B- on this. The instant speed, of course, totally soups this up, totally helps this be way more playable and way better than it would have been otherwise. So B- for me. Next up, we have Sure Strike. Sure Strike is a 1 and a red instant at common, and it says target creature gets +3/+0 and gains first strike until end of turn. I like this. I like this a lot. It's a pretty serious combat trick. +3/+0 and first strike should win combat almost all the time. It's going to be a really, really lopsided combat where your creature doesn't just win, where it trades or even somehow still ends up dying. It's a combat trick, so it's not going to be much higher than a C+, but I'm super happy playing the first of these, and I might even play a second one as long as I still have enough creatures. Yeah, this just seems like a really, really good combat trick. For 1 and a red, I will play the first one of these without even thinking. It just seems super, super, super solid to me for a combat trick. As I said, it's a combat trick. It's not going to be amazing. You're not going to take this first pick ever. You're not going to take this 4th or 5th pick probably ever. But I'm pretty fond of it, so C+ for me. Next up, we have Touch of the Void. Touch of the Void is a 2 and a red sorcery at common. It has Devoid. It is the Void, of course. Touch of the Void deals 3 damage to a creature or player. If a creature dealt damage this way would die this turn, exile it instead. Wow. So Lightning Bolt costs 3 mana now, and it's sorcery speed. But burn is burn. Just how many knocks can it take before it becomes less playable? I'm not entirely sure. We did begrudgingly play Bathe in Dragonfire, although that was 1 mana less than this was for the exact same thing except the exile effect. It does turn on processors, which is kind of cool, but that's sorcery speed. Yeesh. Ultimately you're probably not going to not play this, but I just can't be super excited about it. Our removal over the past few years has taken a hit, and now it looks like our burn is taking a hit. So I'm not super happy about that, but you'll play this, and I guess you'll have to be happy about it. I'll give it a B-, even though that hurts to give. A 3 mana sorcery speed lightning bolt, a B-, but that's the world we live in these days. Next up, we have Tunneling Geopede. Tunneling Geopede is a 2 and a red creature insect at uncommon. It's a 3/2. It's got landfall, saying whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control, Tunneling Geopede deals 1 damage to each opponent. Sure, seems fine. It's a 3/2 for 3, which is nice and aggressive and totally playable as a vanilla creature. Getting in some additional points of damage over the rest of the game is totally fine as well. I'm pretty happy with the first of these, and I think I'm happy with these in multiples. 3/2s for 3 are fine, and of course if you have 2 of these, or somehow 3 of these on the battlefield, each land is shocking or bolting your opponent, which is actually pretty decent. I don't think you're going to realize that dream too often with this being an uncommon, of course, but it's just a totally fine creature. I go with C+ on it. I think it's less replaceable than it is replaceable. Next up, we have Turn Against. Turn Against is a 4 and a red instant at uncommon. It's got Devoid. You gain control of target creature until end of turn. On tap that creature, it gains haste until end of turn. 5 mana. This is also way more expensive than it usually is, so I guess you've got to pay that Eldrazi tax. Everything has to be more expensive when there's Eldrazi Scions kicking around. This effect has always been sort of playable. This exact same card, except not being Devoid, was 2 in a red just a set ago. It's always sort of playable. I personally never really like it and almost never play Active Treason. I certainly get killed by it. It's a card that I hate because you can't really play against it. Playing against it means not playing your good creatures, which is not a viable strategy. Now, there are a considerable amount of sack outlets in black. As we saw, there's Bone Splinters, there's Altar's Reap, there's a couple of more. There's Barrage Titan, even in red here. Barrage Titan? Barrage Giant? Barrage whatever it is. Barrage Tyrant. So there are ways to really take advantage of this, but it does suck that it's at 5 mana. That is a fair bit. You know, yeah, you have Scions to help, but they are single use, and I don't generally want to use a Scion on this unless it's winning me the game. Still, it doesn't fit my personal style, and the cost doesn't really help its case for me, so I'm going to go with a C- on it. Maybe it's a little bit higher, especially with the sack outlets that are kicking around, but for me, I don't like it when it costs 3 mana. I really don't like it when it costs 5 mana, so C- for me. Next up, we have Valakut Invoker. 2 in a red for a creature human shaman at common. It's a 2/3, and for 8 colorless mana, Valakut Invoker deals 3 damage to target creature or player. This was a cycle back in Rise of the Eldrazi. There was an Invoker for each color. It looks like we just get 1 Invoker back this set. So yeah, he's a 2/3 for 3. That's okay. You know, it's totally okay. And here's my instant speed 2 or 3 burn damage. It just simply costs 8 colorless mana to actually get that. Yeah, he's fine as a 2/3 for 3. And he might even eat some early removal due to your opponent fearing you getting to 8 mana. And if you do get to 8, then, oh boy, creatures are going to be dying. Your opponent's going to be on a clock, taking 3 damage a turn. I do like this, but it does require getting to the late game, so it does need to be in the right deck. If you're iffy that you're going to reliably get to 8 mana, then you probably don't want to be playing this as anything more than a 2/3 for 3. You don't want to be, thinking that this is your awesome removal. It's just going to be a creature for you. But if you can get to 8, if you're a slightly more mid-rangey deck, then I think this guy's going to be pretty happy for you. He's going to help give you some inevitability at the end of the game, as long as you're in any way stable. So I'm pretty happy with him. I give him a C+, almost a B-, but that 8 is going to be a little bit tricky. Next up, we have Valakut Predator. This is a 2 in a red creature elemental at common for a 2/2. It's got landfall. Whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control, Valakut Predator gets +2/+2 until end of turn. We've seen this before. This is almost a cycle. I can't actually remember if there was a white one. I don't believe there was. Yes, there was. Undue Greathorn was the white one. So yeah, this is a cycle. This one I really like, actually. It's a slightly overcosted 2/2 for 3. But it's an undercosted 4/4 for 3. And it's going to be a 4/4 a fair amount of the time. And attacking with this as a 4/4 on turn 4, which is very likely to happen, it's going to be pretty solid. And it's going to attack for 4 for, maybe a turn or 2 regularly. And then it's going to live out the rest of its life as a 2/2, as most 2/2s do. I'm really not too upset about playing this card. It's not awesome. It's totally in the filler category, but ever so slightly better filler, I think. I just like that this one's relatively low costed compared to some of the other ones. Some of the other ones, it really feels like you're overpaying significantly for what the base creature is. This one, you're just slightly overpaying. So I give it a C+. I think it's a totally fine playable card that you'll keep a little bit more often than you won't. Next up, we have Vestige of Emrakul. This is 3 and a red for a creature Eldrazi Drone at common. For a 3/4, it has Devoid and it has Trample. And that's it. Not much to say about it. If you want a 3/4 Trample for 4, here it is. It's complete and total filler. Certainly helps out with colorless creatures decks if you're looking to fuel your Barrage Tyrant and get some benefits off your Ruination Guide or any of your other colorless creatures matters cards, then this is a totally fine include. And even if you're not in that, it's still a totally fine include as a creature. It's not exciting, it's not special, but it's there if you need it. Middle of the road C. Next up, we've got Vile Aggregate. This is a 2 and a red for a creature Eldrazi Drone at uncommon. It's a star 5. It has Devoid. It has Trample. It has Ingest. And Vile Aggregate's power is equal to the number of colorless creatures you control. So it's a 1/5 at a minimum, because of course it counts itself. So a 1/5 for 3 at least is not awful, though it's not really what red wants to do. We talked about that with Cozel X Sentinel. If you build properly, this can more reliably be, I would say, a 3/5, maybe a 4/5 or 5/5 if you're lucky. At that point, you should just be winning the game. So don't think about all the awesome times that this is going to be a 10/5, because if it's a 10/5, why isn't the game over? Seems interesting, seems fun, really helps you plan your deck. This is another one of those cards that if you do decide to take this, you know what you're doing. You're taking every Devoid creature you see. You're taking every colorless thing you see. So I kind of like that. Outside of its home, it's kind of weak and not really what red wants to be doing. So play this if you do have a sizable number of colorless creatures. I'm thinking 8 or 9, preferably more, and probably leave it in the sideboard otherwise, because of course it is a fine sideboard card. If you find out that even though you're red, you're not the beatdown, you can side this in and stop your opponent's aggression a little bit. So I like this a fair bit. I'm going to give it a B-, maybe a little bit high, but I don't think so. I'm excited to give it a go. I want to see how it works out, especially in the colorless creatures deck. Next up, we have Volcanic Upheaval. This is a 3 and a red instant at common. Destroy target land. That's it. Nothing else going on here, just destroy target land for 4 mana at instant speed. Total F. Don't play it. Do not play it. Land destruction isn't worth it in limited ever. Just never, ever worth it. You put them a turn behind by destroying their land. Awesome. But you just spent a turn doing that. You're a turn behind. You wasted a turn. Yeah, you might, assuming you're matching them land for land, have 1 more land than them, but you wasted a turn, and you wasted a card slot in your deck. This is never, ever worth it. Never play this card, ever. Maybe sideboard it if there's a man land that you feel you can't handle if it comes on the battlefield or something like that, but that's going to be so rare that it's not even really worth talking about. Absolute F. Don't take this card. Don't play this card. It should be last pick, and it should be thrown away when you take it. Final card for red. We went through red a little bit quick, but final card for red is Zada Hedhryn Grinder. She is a 3 and a red legendary creature goblin ally at rare for 3/3. And sorry, she's a 3/3. She says whenever you cast an instant or sorcery spell that targets only Zada Hedhryn Grinder, copy that spell for each other creature you control that the spell could target. Each copy targets a different one of those creatures. It's worded a little bit weirdly because it has to in order to work within the rules of Magic. But basically, whenever you hit Zada, and only Zada, so no Arc Lightning, this and that and that, it has to only target her, with an instant or sorcery, you copy it and apply it to every single creature that you could. You can't double it up. You can't do 2 copies on this creature and none on the other. It has to target everything you have. And is it a may or a must? Copy that spell. Yeah, you must do it. So do keep that in mind. Now, thankfully, it is when you cast an instant or sorcery. So it's not quite like Precursor Golem, where your opponent can kill Precursor, which then kills the rest of your Golem. This is only you doing this, so that's kind of nice. Now, you need to have stuff to benefit this. It's really awesome with Sure Strike, giving your entire team +3/+0 and First Strike. That's really cool. But you do need to have stuff to really go off with this. So keep that in mind. You have to have playable combat tricks. And not all combat tricks are playable. Looking through red, I'm seeing Sure Strike. And I'm not seeing too much else that I super want to just throw on Zada to get everything else with it. In fact, I'm seeing nothing else in red that I would cast targeting Zada. It doesn't copy abilities, which definitely hurts a little bit. It's a very cool card. Don't get me wrong. It's a very, very, very cool card. And if you do first pick it, you obviously get to make sure that you build around it. You get to take those Sure Strikes a little bit more highly. You get to take the combat tricks in whatever other color you go into a little bit more highly. I think it is fairly bomby, but it does require some non-trivial amount of those pump spells to be worth it, which lowers your creature count, which means you're not going to get as much effect out of it. Be careful with Zada. She's going to be super powerful in Commander. I think she's probably going to have a place in a seal or a standard deck for sure. But she's going to be a little bit tricky to deal with in Limited, a little bit tricky to really get the biggest amount of value out of her. So be careful with her. I do really like her. I give her an A-. I'm going to first pick her. I'm going to play with her at least the first time that I see her. But it's going to require some careful drafting. So make sure that you keep in mind everything that you're picking if you first pick a Zada, because you want to get that value out of her, and it's going to require some careful drafting. So A- for me, with a huge warning caveat. And just, that's a general warning caveat in draft anyways. I don't want to get into general draft advice here, but just because a card is amazing in other formats doesn't mean it's all that good in draft. Keep that in mind. But that's going to wrap it up for red. As I said, we went through it a little bit more quickly. I think red just had way more straightforward cards than white, blue, or black did. The cards do what they say, and they are good, or they are bad, or they are mediocre. And it's interesting. The grades are all over. There's definite A's, there's definite F's, there's B's and C's, there's everything there. But I think the cards are much more straightforward. Red wants to be aggressive in almost all cases. It doesn't really have many processors. Interestingly, it has a processor sorcery. But yeah, it looks interesting. It doesn't have the burn that we're so used to red having. So I don't know what role red is going to serve, or what role red is going to serve outside of being the ally color, one of the ally colors to pair with white. There's certainly some other roles there. There's hints as to what could be there, but it's going to be interesting. I don't think red's going to feel quite like what red normally feels like, but we'll have to see. As I said, I'm excited to play with Zada. I definitely want to see how Rolling Thunder plays out in this format. Hopefully it's not as format warping as it has been in the past. I'm excited to try out the Firebird, even the Hellkite I want to give a try. And I'm excited to see some players try to play Volcanic Upheaval or some of the other Fs against me, and for me to just feel happy that I'm that confident I will do well in that game. But that's going to wrap it up for this video. Hopefully you guys enjoyed this video. Hopefully you guys are enjoying all the videos. As always, if you want to find me on Twitter, you can at The Mana Leak. That's L-E-E-K, like the vegetable, not the card. And you can also find me on Facebook at facebook.com/TheManaLeak. You've already found me here on YouTube. You've got the comment section down below. You guys have been making great use of that. Love interacting with you guys down there. Love seeing you guys interact with each other down there. Make use of the comments section. As well, if you like the videos, you should click those little thumbs up icons. That lets me know that you like the videos. That lets the world know that you like the videos and keeps my videos rising up through the ranks. Finally, if you haven't subscribed, you should. There is a button below each video. There is one in the outro of each video, and clicking that will keep you posted on all the latest Crack-A-Pack Tuesdays, Wacky Wednesdays, Spiky Saturdays, and of course the rest of the set reviews. You want to know when that green set review goes up tomorrow? Make sure you subscribe. As always, if you have any questions, comments, or suggestions, let me know. Otherwise, I will see you all tomorrow.